This story's got a bit of a sad title. It's called Nobody's Granny, and it's written by Tess Brady and illustrated by Kay Stewart. A little old lady who was nobody's granny lived in a small cottage. Her garden was an exciting jungle. Trees, bushes, shadows and strange flowers all grew tangled together. At the back of her garden there was an old fence that had holes in it, big enough to climb through. After school, the children from the nearby flats liked to sneak through the holes in the fence and play in the jungle garden. Edith had a cubby house under the old pepper tree. Natalie picked the flowers. There were always different ones to choose from. Some had long stems, some were bright colours, and some were very, very small. James liked to hunt for caterpillars and to watch the brown butterflies. Nassim and his cat played hide and seek in the tall grass. The little old lady who was nobody's granny stayed inside her cottage and watched the children. She liked to hear them laughing and playing in the bushes. One day at about lunchtime, a truck pulled up outside the old lady's cottage. It was from a company that put up brand new fences. Great big strong fences that nobody and nothing could crawl through, not even Nassim's cat. The little old lady came out of her cottage just as they'd pulled down the last of her old fence. "What are you doing?" she asked. "We've got an order here, madam," was all the man would say. He pointed to a piece of paper. The little old lady put on her glasses and looked at it very carefully. Someone who thought they were being kind to her had paid for a new fence. James, Natalie, Edith and Nassim came home from school just as the men were finishing the fence. It was enormous. The tallest fence they had ever seen. It was so tall they could only see the tips of the biggest trees in the jungle garden. Nassim's cat tried to go underneath it, but there weren't any holes. James tried to climb it, but there weren't any gaps to put his foot into. Natalie tried to get in at the corner, but that didn't work either. There was no way to sneak into that jungle garden. The little old lady who was nobody's granny grew lonely. In the afternoon she could hear her little friends talking and laughing on their way home from school, but they couldn't climb through her fence, so they couldn't play in her jungle garden anymore. "Bother," she said to herself. "I'll have to do something about this." So she put on her best hat and went to the company that sold fences. "I've just had a fence put up by your people and it's no good. It's not a proper one." The man looked puzzled. Is it a proper one?" "It hasn't got any holes in it," she said. "It needs some holes big enough for a cat or a little child to squeeze through." "Holes, madam? We don't have holes in our fences." And he laughed at the little old lady who was nobody's granny. Next, she went to the council chambers. "I want to see the town clerk," she said. A very busy-looking man came out to her. "You want to see me?" he asked. "Yes," said the little old lady who was nobody's granny. "I want the council to fix my fence." "What's wrong with it?" he asked. "It's a big strong fence that's just been put up, but there are no holes in it," she explained. "And you want holes in your fence?" he asked. "Yes, just one or two, so a small child or a cat can climb through." "Definitely not," said the town clerk. "We can't do that. We can send someone round to register your dog, to get rid of rats, to collect your garbage, to check if your fowl yard is up to standard, but we don't put holes in new fences." "Oh," she said, "but I don't have a dog and I don't have rats and I don't have a fowl yard." Then he said with a gruff voice, "We can't help you." "Humph," she said to herself, and went off down the road to the hardware shop. In the window was a sign, "Handyman, no job too small." She walked into the shop and said to the man behind the counter, "Excuse me, young man, I have a job for the handyman." "That's me," he said. "What can I do for you?" "I want you to put some holes in my new fence, holes big enough for a cat and a little child to wriggle through. Just one or two will be plenty." Holes in a new fence. I've never heard of such a thing. I'll fix up holes, but I won't put them in. Not at all. The little old lady who was nobody's granny walked slowly home. She felt very sad that no one could help her put holes in her new fence. "What's the matter? You seem upset," said a voice. She looked up. The voice belonged to a young scout. With him were lots of other scouts, and behind them was their leader. She smiled sadly. "I can't get anyone to put some holes in my fence, just one or two, so a small child or a cat can squeeze through." "Are you sure that's what you want?" asked the scout leader. "Oh, yes," said the little old lady. "I've been given a new fence, you see, and it's not a proper one." "Aha," said the scout leader as he paced up and down the tall fence. "There's not a hole anywhere." And all the scouts echoed, "Not a hole anywhere." "Why don't we dig a tunnel under it?" said one scout. The leader shook his head. "Too dangerous." "Then," said another scout, "let's build a bridge." "Now that is a good idea," said their leader, looking pleased. He went into the little old lady's shed where he found some planks and some very strong rope. "These will be just fine," he said. Before long, the scouts were sitting in a circle under the pepper tree doing the kind of things scouts like doing best. They were tying knots, big and fat knots, this and that knots, lots of knots, to make a rope ladder. "There," said the scout leader, and taking the ladder he went out the gate and into the street and around to the back fence, and so did all the scouts. "This will do nicely," he said. The scout leader took a couple of very strong nails and attached the rope ladder to the fence. One by one the scouts tugged and pulled on it to make sure it was quite safe and secure. Then the scout leader and his scout patrol went back to the garden and hammered and sawed the wooden planks. Before long they were finished, a rope ladder on one side and a wooden ladder on the other. All the scouts tried climbing backwards and forwards over the fence. The little old lady who was nobody's granny said she didn't really want to try the ladder. She said she thought they were fine-looking ones. Then she brought them out a glass of lemonade and a bush biscuit buttered on one side. The very next day the little old lady heard the sound of laughter in her garden and saw the tall grass swish as a cat and a boy jumped from behind a bush. Edith found her cubby just as she had left it. Natalie picked a bunch of orange flowers and left them on the cottage doorstep. Nassim and his cat played in the tall grass, and James hunted for caterpillars. The little old lady who was nobody's granny watched from her window. "Ah," she smiled, "it's good to have my friends back in the garden again." And she had a cup of tea and a bush biscuit buttered on one side. That story had a really nice happy ending, didn't it? I hope you enjoyed it.